Interestingly, and this is a key point I often tell people, the Maasai today or 10,000 years ago, it doesn't matter, their vitamin D is around 45 nanogram for men and around 55 nanogram for women. Now that's around 100 nanomole or 130 nanomole. So these are levels way higher than the guidelines. And they're natural levels, even though they have black skin. They've got intense UV, they've got a great diet with meat and milk, and they stay up in around 50 nanogram. But their cousins, genetically the same, the Bantu, they went to the cities, started wearing lots of clothes, eating processed foods, that the white man brought, and their vitamin D is not much better than Europeans or Americans. It's down at 20 something. So we can see the real vitamin D level of the real healthy human. There's no question about this. And the guidelines put you like that even 20 is fine. And that's a lie. That's a fraud. Simple fraud. Here are Caucasian athletes in Wyoming, and they're out in the sun. They're very fit and healthy, not insulin resistant. That drives down your D level. And they're probably eating pretty well as well. I hope they're eating meat. I'm sure they were. And they're up, men in the 40s and women in the 50s. So Caucasians, same thing. This is the healthy level. 30 nanogram I'd put as the lower limit of safety for me. But the system puts 20 or even 15 is okay. So it's a lie. It's a fraud. And this one I love from Professor Hollis. Hollis did this experiment with pregnant women and lactating women. And I thought it was a stunner. And he proved his point so eloquently that the world made sure no one heard about it. It was that good. It was made sure that no one knew about it. So, evolutionary son, a mother might get 6,400 IUs a day of vitamin D. That was his estimate. And the baby only got the breast milk like 100 years ago and for the previous 10,000 years, 100,000 years, million years. So the baby only gets breast milk. Obviously, there's no supplements in evolutionary history. And the mother would get lots of sun, obviously, because she'd be out working like the men or hunting, and they get loads of sun and usually good food. The modern reality is the mother, they recommend 400 IUs a day, might be up to 800 now. So you can see the farce. All the women in America and Europe are all clothed. They don't want to get too much sun, right? And they're recommended 400 instead of evolutionarily, they would have got 6,400 approximately. And because the baby obviously won't get enough vitamin D, they recommend 300 for the baby. Now, the baby's tiny, so 300 for the baby should mean a few thousand for the mother, right? Body weight. But they don't care. They just don't care. It's idiocy. So that's the modern reality. They supplement the baby because the mother is deficient. Now, how many other things do babies per force must be supplemented because the mother's breast milk is universally deficient in something? How many other things? The answer is nothing. There's nothing else that breast milk, they say, the experts, is deficient and the baby will suffer. So you must supplement the baby. Nothing but vitamin D, right? So again, this is stupidity or fraud. So that's modern reality versus natural. So Hollis was very smart and he said, okay, I'm going to give the mothers in one arm of the RCT vitamin D3, plenty of it, like would have happened in evolution. And the other side will just do nothing but the 400, but we'll supplement the baby, right? Baby has to be protected. So vitamin D3 in the breast milk for his mothers who got proper vitamin D was 47 in the breast milk. And naturally, the mothers who were getting 400 was 12. It was deficient in the breast milk for the baby. So the baby needed that supplement simply because the mother was not getting an appropriate amount. And 25 OHD in the mother over here supplemented was 57, and the 25 OHD over here was 38. It was much lower because they were only getting a trivial supplement. And this is nanograms. But the baby over here with the mother supplemented was 46, which is good. So he proved his point. The baby over here was directly given supplements and was 43. That's okay. But over here, the baby was getting no supplements. It was totally natural. He proved his point. And the milk activity of vitamin D in the women who were kept properly supplemented with vitamin D or got some sun as it came into spring was 780 units. And the women over here, their breast milk, in terms of vitamin D for the baby, was 147, which was useless. So he proved his point. You supplement the mother at an appropriate level, and the baby's fine, just like was the case for hundreds of thousands of years. He's only proving basic reality. So, to cap the point, the mother getting proper D gives her D3 at a proper level, the milk is properly loaded, and the milk activity is appropriate, and the baby's fine. This is natural. Even if you use supplements to give the mother supplements, it's actually nature working. Over here, the mother is dreadfully low in vitamin D because the supplement they recommend is a joke, right? It's a crime in my mind. And as a result, her milk is useless. So this is a simple picture, right, guys? God bless Professor Hollis. This is a simple picture. He proved it beautifully. But Semmelweis proved his point about washing hands after doing autopsies so you wouldn't kill loads of mothers when you deliver babies with dirty hands from the autopsies. But they basically threw him in an insane asylum and basically killed him. So luckily, Hollis just never got his data, his brilliant data circulated. They didn't actually put him in an insane asylum. But, you know, this is modern medicine. So this is the way it is. I won't go through this bit, but every bad disease, bone mineral density, fractures, colon cancer, walk time for 8 feet for elderly, attachment loss, everything associates with low vitamin D. Control system criticality. I'll touch on this because I think it's good. We have 35 trillion cells. Every single cell has all of our DNA. We're that kind of covered for our code. And inside the nucleus, you've got the DNA. But interestingly, your blood serum level that you get in the doctor's test, the 25-OHD, that's active. And it can also, through the kidney, create 125D at much lower amounts. That's very targeted and powerful hormone. So that's like the bullet. But the 25-OHD is like an ammo pack, and it is used directly in myriad functions for your health. And it can actually go create 125D, and that's vitamin D receptor and a transcription kind of protein. It can go in to your DNA when you have a problem, and vitamin D is used, the active metabolite 125, is used to actually go in and transcribe a segment of your DNA code for a protein that's required. That's how profound it is. And there's also a safety switch. I found this from very early papers back in 2014, that when the protein is produced, there's a backfeed signal that shuts off this process. So it's all self-controlling. You can't have too much vitamin D, it self-limits. All beautifully designed. And I just went through back then the mechanisms where the 125D goes in to the exact point in your DNA, finds the protein that's needed, that's why the D was triggered, unwraps your double helix, 2 strands of DNA for the piece with the vitamin D receptor, and creates mRNA to code the protein that's required. That's transcription. And basically then the RNA in the cytoplasm in the rest of the cell, most RNAs are grabbed by the cell and replicated by default because the cell makes the assumption that the RNA is there for good reason because it came out the nucleus. Now, an RNA vaccine kind of cheats, and you could argue whether that's good or not. But these proteins, when you have TB, for instance, vitamin D enables critical proteins to be extracted from your library. For cattle sidin is an example. That's a kind of biocide for TB and other kind of infections. So you produce a big burst of these biocides that attack the invading infection. And replication in the cell means you create a kind of a storm of them, and they are relevant to myriad diseases. So this is the profound nature of vitamin D. And yet the system says we don't care about vitamin D. You only need a few hundred microunits, which is a joke. It's not important. Our drugs are better. 2007, vitamin D mediated human antimicrobial activity against tuberculosis is dependent on the induction of cathelicidin. And I just went through the process there. So, papers on this, no one cares. And they did an actual test, an experiment as part of this paper, and vitamin D, you can see going higher here, drove up cathelicidin. And then the other enzyme that shut things off went up after there was an appropriate concentration of cathelicidin, and the 125D3 receptors were shut off. So it's amazing stuff. And it's just so important for the immune system. And I know Dr. David Grimes, I interviewed him in late 2020, and he implored people, if you are going to take this new product, right, this new vaccine, okay, I wouldn't, but if you're going to do it, please get your vitamin D level up before you do, or you could have any amount of autoimmune or clotting issues. And I guess Dr. Grimes was proven entirely correct. So I won't go through these, but they just show again and again low vitamin D correlates with everything terrible, and high vitamin D correlates with minimal terrible things. Colon cancer is a killer, and our mortality over 32 nanogram. These are fair comparative studies. You know, look at the rate of colon cancer versus below 20, and that's below 20. A lot of people are below 10. And you can see the straight line that if everyone was at even a reasonable level of vitamin D from the correlation, you could have a 55% reduction in colon cancer, one of the biggest killers. Breast cancer is the same. Now, it's not saying vitamin D is magically stopping the cancer, but if everyone was up in the 50s, like carnivores and low carb people, yes, you'd have massively lower cancer. Okay? And breast cancer, I said, was the same, similar thing, always the same. And I forget what that one is. Dose response gradient or risk of breast cancer according to 25-OHD. Yeah, you're talking about just hugely lower risks. Here's mortality, chalk and cheese, really. And that's only over 25 nanogram per mil, right? I always stay above 50. So's my wife. And I won't go through the rest of the multiple sclerosis, but you can see it versus sun exposure in this study, matched cases and controls, sun exposure higher, dramatically lower MS. And actinic damage is better, and I love this one. They measure with a microscope your skin, and they get a direct, say you're lying about the sun you got. Well, this actually looks at your skin and is able to measure the amount of slight sun damage you got in your skin and truly see if you got a lot of sun. And the relationship is even more powerful. People who have actinic skin damage from the sun, I don't mean that's bad, it's just microscopic evidence of more sun. You've got nearly 10 times lower multiple sclerosis in the people who have proven more sun exposure. So quite dramatic. And it was exposure, I think, ages 6 to 10 and 10 to 16, because they were looking at it as exposure in youth is a bigger determinant than exposure later, which would make sense. It heads off the future problem of MS. Influenza, of course, and corona, huge seasonal sinusoidal curves. One factor, not the whole factor, one factor is vitamin D. And the factor they tell you that's complete BS. Oh, in the winter, people are inside and closer to each other and it spreads. Duh. Guess what? In the last 30, 40 years, all winter long, people are indoors, and all summer long, they're indoors in their corporate jobs, right? 40, 50 hours a week. There's no real major difference. So that's not the reason. The reason is vitamin D and human immune system cycles, and viruses have different activity levels depending on the UV. In NHANES 3 in the 1988 to 94, the amount of people who were above 30 nanogram, which is the minimum, was around 50% of Americans. But by 2001, around 10 years later, it was only 25% were above 30. And even 30 is too low for me. And for black people, there was only 10% or 12 above 30 nanogram, 10% of them in America. And 10 years later, there was only 3% of them. I mean, these numbers are shocking. And I think I gave the example, well, I won't go back now, but the Maasai, if you looked at the Maasai, all of them, these bars would be up at 100%. Pretty much 100% of them would be above 30. 100% nearly be above 40. So it just shows you the catastrophe of low vitamin D in the world today is just beyond reckoning. But lambs are given 10 times more vitamin D3 in their milk formula than humans. So the agriculture system is prioritizing vitamin D for animals. But the medical system for humans is saying, oh, don't worry about that. Oh, no, no, no. It's conspiracy theory. So it's pretty sick now. I hope you'll agree. In 1988, they were just showing the panacea of the sun, that the sun had effect on nearly every gland, every function, every organ. The sun, the panacea of the sun. European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2012. No one's listening. I think the diagram is from 88, but reviewing the whole thing was 2012. But they're basically pulling their hair out saying, guys, the sun is hugely important. All of this says go out, get tanned to hell, get sun lamps if you don't have sun. And to be honest, that's what I do and that's what I say. So the big sticking point is, but what about skin cancer, Ivor? Well, let's talk about that. And as you might expect, it's not what you think. Oh, by the way, here's the USA around 10 or 15 years ago. The vast majority are deficient. And 15 years before 2010, 50% were deficient, but now 70% are. 10 years ago. Now, what is it, 80, 85%? Hey, soon we'll have everyone deficient in vitamin D. One of the drivers against having healthy vitamin D level is the skin cancer melanoma hysteria. UVB is around 290, 310 nanometers wavelength. This is what produces vitamin D, right? So blue is the zone of a narrow zone of special wavelength of light. That's UVB, not UVA. And it enables vitamin D synthesis and cholesterol sulfate, which is a long story, hugely important. This is crucial for health for humans. The red is the zone that enables tan protection and warning sunburn. So it's overlapped. So the same wavelengths give you the warning signal of erythema or slight sunburn. So you know when to back off, right? Only an idiot would get really burned because, come on, if you get the sun as the season gets stronger and you keep getting as much as you can without burning, you'll develop a tan and that will automatically regulate and make sure you don't burn. Duh. So that's it. And the green suggests cosmetic skin cancers may be caused by the same spectra. But this is a suggestion. And remember that melanoma is the only really problematic cancer, skin cancer. It's not even skin. It occurs in the colon and everything. But melanoma is the bad guy with huge mortality rates. The other basal and squamous skin cancers are actually called by some people cosmetic because they're so easily removed and the mortality is so low. They're kind of cosmetic issue. My father had it 10 years before he died. He just went up and he got an operation, like outpatient, and they put a little plastic kind of thing in his head just to keep the little stitched wound covered, and a couple of days later that came off. That's the standard for the skin cancers that may be promoted by sun. Melanoma ain't promoted by sun, right? That's the revelation here today. So 95% of terrestrial UV energy is UVA, and it goes through ozone and even glass. It's got benefits, but you might argue that UVA could be causing or causal of malignant melanoma. So the irony is, it's not even the UVB that we try and block. It's probably the UVA that has some connection to melanoma, and it goes through glass and ozone and most sunblocks anyway. So the melanoma zone, if there is one, that's the serious stuff, and it's more attached to UVA. And the squamous and basal cell skin cancers, which are kind of cosmetic, have tiny mortalities, and the deaths per year out of 340 million people in the USA are 2,000. There's 9,000 deaths a year from melanoma, and that would be more linked to UVA, right? Most sunscreens don't block UVA. Some of the modern ones do, but most of the historical ones didn't. So they were completely like a chocolate teapot, as we'd say in Ireland, a chocolate radiator, utterly useless. But the sunscreens block like hell UVB. It can't even go through tissue paper. So they stop you getting your vitamin D. They stop you getting your sun callus or your tan. They don't do anything related to cancer, right? They're a disaster. And I said, who's the idiot? Evolution itself, or how humans interpreted it, or the medical industry, or big pharma, or the cosmetic sunscreen industry? Weekend exposure in this study for melanoma occurrence and risk. Higher sun, lower melanoma. Holiday exposure from big surveys with the study groups, few thousand people. Higher holiday exposure recorded, lower melanoma risk. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., the high UVB period, they asked them. Higher exposure, lower melanoma occurrence. Strong correlation seen in this study to their vitamin D level. Surprise, surprise. And one of many, many studies showing this effect. Higher sun, lower malignant melanoma, lower mortality from melanoma. Out the wazoo. No one wants to look at these studies, and no one has studies showing the opposite. It's just fairy stories, guys. Sorry. The real risk factors for malignant melanoma in the same study called out by these teams, significant sun burning incidents did have a weak risk or higher risk ratio for melanoma. And anyone who burns themselves, let's be honest, I don't want to be harsh, they're kind of an idiot anyway, because no one burnt themselves 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. That's a modern phenomenon of office workers getting 2 weeks off in high summer and going to south of Spain and burning their ass off. That's just idiocy. And light skin, freckles, red hair, and a propensity to burn was a risk factor for melanoma. So in a nutshell, as much sun as you can get without burning will make you live longer and healthier, and you won't have to worry about melanoma, and you might get a little bit more cosmetic skin cancers, but it's a small price to pay. And if you burn, baby, you will cause deep damage to your skin, and it may tend towards a higher risk for melanoma. Isn't that a simple message? As much sun as you can get without burning, right? Don't be an idiot, and you'll be healthier and live longer, and everything will be better. And I have loads more studies from that period as well, that the more sunscreen use invariably was connected to higher risk of melanoma, even when corrected for every factor they could deconfound with. Always sunscreen associated melanoma. And I think that's just simply because it doesn't cause melanoma. But when you go out, you have a false sense of security. It stops the tanning reaction, it stops the burning reaction, and the UVA goes like a freight train through the sunscreen and damages the deep layers of your skin. So sunscreen is a driver of malignant melanoma simply because it acts as a false sense of security, a fake shield that allows you to deeply burn yourself without actual skin burn or sunburn or erythema. Go figure. Go figure. This study from Sweden went out. It was a cancer study looking at melanoma, and then they expanded the study hugely when they realized what they saw was shocking. They, they began to change it into an all-cause mortality study. So basically, all-cause mortality was half in the upper quartile of sun exposure. The highest quarter of the Swedish women, 30,000 of them, the highest quarter in terms of sun exposure had half the all-cause mortality. And this applied after adjustment for comorbidities, other illnesses, smoking, education, and income. Because you could say, well, the Swedish women are getting more sun or off in the Seychelles. But no, they corrected for everything they could. And it didn't change a thing. More sun, live longer. Who'd have thought? Dose-response relationship seen throughout. Another sign of causality. Dose response. It wasn't spotty. It wasn't kind of chaotic. It was all the way. More sun, longer life. I can't say fairer than that. The 25 hydroxy D was cited as a reason, maybe, but there are so many other benefits of the sun. Huge amounts of photoproducts that are generated by our body based on sun exposure, and they haven't even investigated them. And of course, UVA in moderate amounts or good amounts causes vasodilation and nitric oxide release, which is probably the best possible thing you can do for arterial health. It goes on and on and on. Loads of vitamin D. I circled healthy sun exposure because it's the best way. Nutrient dense diet, fat dense diet, oily fish, cod liver, pate, etc. Correct D3 supplements, good ones, are okay. And get adequate calcium, vitamin K2, vitamin A, and magnesium. Because hypervitamin D, without getting a kind of appropriate level of cofactors, could be a problem, actually. Too much D and not the natural balance of the other things you usually get along with D. Particularly vitamin A, K2, calcium, magnesium. They're kind of the big hitters. And the prize is everything. Bone strength, immune function, vigor, longevity, cancer resistance, disease protection, the whole lot.